I found that for inflammation, that works as good or better than ibuprofen, quite frankly. So we really try to watch what it is that we're putting in our bodies and think about it, and not just accept, what the drug companies are telling us. All things being even, I love ibuprofen. It works great for me as a painkiller, as an inflammation, reducer, things like that. I just know it's not healthy. The body recovers when it's at rest. You don't get stronger during exercise, you get stronger during recovery.
Hi, this is Sifu Slim, author of The Aging Athlete. In this book, you're going to get to hear about two different groups of former high-performance athletes. One group, which is made up of 90% of the former athletes, does not do physical activity on a regular basis and tends to suffer the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. The other group, which is made up of 10% of the former athletes, is doing physical activity on a regular basis and tends to thrive through the aging process, or at least has a better chance at coping with the aging process. We could have taken these folks to a lab and done all kinds of tests on them. Instead, we slowed them down and sat them down and asked them, in their own words, to describe why they're wired the way they are, so that we all, former athletes and non-athletes, can use some of their inspirational and motivational and mindset lessons in our own lives. I hope you pick up a copy today. You can go to theagingathlete.com. And when you have a chance to read it, I'd love to hear back from you to find out what your thoughts are on the stories of these aging athletes.
And I'm Sifu Slim. I'm a wellness author, public speaker, and interviewer. And we'll bring in Steve to share a little bit of background. And then we'll ask him that big question about what's in people's medicine cabinets and when he learned to put the right things perhaps in his system and not just reach for the NSAIDs.
Yeah, well, I'm Steve Shepard. I'm here in Santa Barbara. I'm a filmmaker during the day, a corporate filmmaker, and I've, in the last couple of years, got into bodywork. So I'm a massage therapist in town, building my practice. I watched the decline of my parents' health over several years, and a lot of it had to do with diet and the stuff they were putting in their bodies and the way they treated their bodies. And it really had an impact on me and my wife. So we really kind of radically changed our lifestyle and diet. We went to what could be described as sort of a primal paleo type thing. We kind of modified it for our needs. We found a lot of benefit in that. And going with that, we really started looking at what it is that we're putting in our bodies besides just food. And NSAIDs are one of those things that have a lot of side effects. There's times where you got to get through it. You got to get through the pain to get healed and stuff like that. And there's times for that, but I rarely use them. I try to look for something else that will deal with the inflammation. First of all, if I have a little headache, I'm not going to reach for something right away. It's just, you have those things. So every little headache, things like that, I'm not reaching for something to take care of that. But when I do have inflammatory issues, I've got calcified tendonitis in my rotator cuff, and if that flares up, man, it hurts. And it's inflammation. And so I'll use maybe a little bit of ice, but primarily I'll use something like turmeric or something like that. I found that for inflammation, that works as good or better than ibuprofen, quite frankly. So we really try to watch what it is that we're putting in our bodies and think about it, and not just accept, what the drug companies are telling us.
I'm with you. So you mentioned turmeric. So in Hawaii, the roots are growing in many of the farms organically, and I don't think they're that hard to grow. I'm on the rainy side of Oahu, and they seem to thrive over here. The curcumin, the turmeric, etc. And so I've got that in my concoction this morning. I've got turmeric powder, ginger powder, cinnamon, and this is giving me like a terrific antibacterial boost, energy flow, the blood flow, all that stuff is increased. And it's not like caffeine where it just amps up your system and has a tendency to mess you up. This is doing it naturally, and it's not going to amp me up if my body doesn't need to be amped up. Like if I want to do this towards the end of the day, it's amazing. It doesn't amp me up. It just kind of cleans my system out and allows me to wind down the day. So I've been drinking this all day, and people talk about detoxing their bodies, and I have in here floating around, you may be able to see it right there, some detox tea. And detox tea is a huge profit center. I'm not saying these companies don't have good intentions, but you can buy a little canister like this, and because they say detox tea on it, that could be $15 creme de la creme detox tea. But I'm using it because I believe some of these companies are legitimate, but I don't think you need to go to that extreme for your average use. So detoxing, anti-inflammatory. I did find out the D is drugs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. And we think of drugs, or we were programmed to think of drugs growing up in the 60s and 70s. I was a little kid. My mother took me to the doctor. I had her uncle, so my great uncle was a pharmacist. So these people knew that drugs they were trained that certain drugs were able to fix certain problems or help us heal certain problems in our body. And I was taught that those are good and those are helpful. Along the way, I changed my mind about that, and I'll let you chime in, Steve, to see what your thoughts are.
I think there are certain drugs that are helpful. I think even NSAIDs have their place. Sometimes for your body to heal, it's got to be able to rest. And if you're in such excruciating pain that you cannot get any rest, that can hinder it. It's certainly not anything to use for chronic pain, because it actually creates this cycle where you become dependent on them for pain relief. It actually sort of numbs it to the point where when you don't have it, that pain just comes right back, and it's worse than it was before. So very, very sparingly. It's hard on the stomach, things like that. I think there's places for stuff like that. There's other drugs that I think are helpful. I think there's a lot of drugs that are just put out there to make money for Big Pharma. I see very little conclusive evidence that things like cholesterol drugs, statins and stuff like that really have any major effect. And in fact, the only time that cholesterol is a problem is if you have inflammation. If you're eating right, get rid of the sugar, good fats, not the garbage that they usually put in a lot of food, stuff like that. You get rid of that stuff, there's nothing for those platelets to stick to. So cholesterol is not really a problem. And they're finding problems with cognitive issues and things like that with people on cholesterol drugs, because your brain needs cholesterol. Yeah, there's a lot of things that, we could go on forever about various drugs that a lot of them have good intentions, but sometimes the cure is worse than the disease.
So
that kind of thing.
I mentioned downtime as a significant part of my wellness lifestyle. So having downtime and allowing your body to heal, your mind can heal, your spirit can regroup, your emotional energy can replenish, and you get to actually think and look out at a tree, see a chicken walking by if you're in a rural area. I'm in Hawaii. We have wild chickens all over the place, and they're lovely. And I'm when we have occasional roosters that go a little bit too early, that's a problem for our sleep. But I'm very fortunate right where I am right now. They're not sounding off before the sun, so there are no cockamamie roosters out there at 3 in the morning doing their thing. So I was very sedentary for a period of time writing this book. This book is called Sedentary Nation. It's my first book on wellness, and I was sedentary. So what were the problems associated with that? Well, there's less blood flow moving through my body. The base of my butt, if you look at a skeleton and you look how sharp the angles of the hip are and they come down to a point, that's pressing on your tissue. And I don't have a really big butt. I don't have a no butt, but I have what I would call, my ex-girlfriend called it, a dinky butt. And so that dinky butt has that bone pointing it, and the bone with all that pressure, it wants to press down and support, and that tissue is trying to cushion the blow from sitting in a chair. So a lot of my book writing was done in my vehicle, and I covered all the windows with airplane blankets and put the aluminum looking thing over the front. But that was, after my workout, then I'd have breakfast, and then I would write, often for 3 to 5 hours, taking stretch breaks on the hour and those types of things. So I did as best I could to be less sedentary than completely sedentary. But it slows down your metabolism. It slows down the way you process the molecule glucose, which is unhealthful. So I got up, I have jump rope in my car, I have stretching, I do all these things, but still being sedentary was a problem. Whereas if you're in a body worker position and you're standing up and you're moving and you're interacting with a new person every hour and a half or so, that's very healthful, as long as you're taking care of your posture and you're getting your own therapy in the way of a massage. So maybe you can share sedentary lifestyle, your corporate background, and maybe being a student, and then comparing that to a filmmaker and now a body worker.
Yeah, I've been kind of up and down in terms of being sedentary. In my 20s, I was a UPS driver. So, I was always on the move. I'd come home from work and my wife would say, let's go for a walk. And I'm like, you got to be kidding. That's what I've done all day, And then I went into tech and then I'm sitting. And talking. That was the other thing. I was in tech support initially, and I'd come home and my wife would be like, let's talk. And it's like, let's not. Let's go for a walk. I've been talking all day. So, and then for about 5 or 6 years, I was a very avid cyclist. I was riding 100, 200 miles a week. I think I might have been riding away from a few things in my life as well. And I was in great shape. Like a
cyclist, what's your height and weight when you're in your super fit aerobic capacity?
I'm 6'2". If I'm riding a lot, it's 185 to 190.
Person in the Tour de France type people. I'm 6'2" and a half.
I'm not a great mountain climber. I can ride forever. I probably wouldn't win any races, but I was in the kind of shape where I could ride 100, 125 miles, and but that was a few years ago. Went through some life changes and been in tech and doing a lot of sitting and editing and stuff like that. Now I'm actually, where I'm at right now, I'm at a stand-up workstation. This is where I do my editing. So I've tried to get out of just sitting. Standing has its own issues too. We can talk a little bit about that, because some people think that's like the silver bullet. Oh, I'll just stand. No, you got to move. You standing on a even flat surface for hours at a time can be. It's got its own challenges, just like sitting. Can we take a break and show people one thing that you can do if you're at a standing desk with hands free, and it's called a jumping jack. And let me. I just lost your picture. There we go. So would you mind indulging me on the count of 3? We'll go 1, 2, 3. 3 jumping jacks. There we go. Yeah. And I feel better already just from 3 jumping jacks. Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. You got to move. Yeah. I've seen a couple of fatigue mats that were very interesting. One has a little mound in the middle and a ridge around it of different heights, so that you can get your feet sitting at different angles, so they're not just flat on the ground. My wife actually got a standing desk at her work, put a treadmill under it, thought that's going to be great, worked on the treadmill. She ended up with back and hip problems because the absolute repetitive injury stuff. It's too flat, it's too perfect, it's too repetitive. And she actually She actually had problems with her back and her hips and stuff like that because of that. So you really gotta move. And so getting off the couch is one thing, but you got to find what works for you. I hate running. But when I started cycling, I could cycle for hours. I could go on a 6-hour ride and love every minute of it. But and of course, then if I get on a stationary trainer, 20 minutes in, I'm ready to blow my brains out. So it's you got to find what works.
So filming, were you ever filming documentaries out in the bush, the woods, the field, where you had to get down and crawl around, that type of thing?
Nothing quite that extreme, but you mostly what I do right now is we go out and we profile our software clients. And so it's a little bit of, basically it's sort of like a little mini documentary about them, how they're using the software, what their particular company's like. And there is, it's pretty physical. And early on, I would forget that. And I'd go out and like, wow, man, I am just beat to crap today. And it's like, well, yeah, I've been hauling 300 pounds of equipment here and there. And you have to get into these positions to get the shot. You want something low, the rig that I'm using sometimes is pretty light because it's a DSLR, but I also a lot of times have it outfitted with a monitor and this and that and sound, and sometimes it can get pretty heavy. I had shot a music video for a friend of mine, a great blues guitarist, and I was doing handheld for like 4 hours, and it was all I could do, not to just be shaking, because the weight of the rig. So it is. I give the guys that are doing this full time, every day, a lot of credit. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, people talk about the hand movements, 280 different hand movements that we do each day, and the problems that can be associated with that, especially if your body is inflamed systemically. And then you talk about repetitive stress injuries. So if you're doing the same injury over and over, cutting, swiping, anchovies in the 1940s, what have you, in Monterey and Cannery Row, that was a tough job, repetitive stress injury. But just holding something is incredibly difficult. So you're trying to hold a Steadicam steady, shooting that. You mentioned 4 hours. My God, that seems like an eternity to be holding something and concentrating.
It wasn't 4 hours straight, but it was a 4 hour period where most of the time I had a camera in my hand, and it was and these guys, these guys do it all the time. And when I got into bodywork, one of the things that's really stressed if you're in a good school is body mechanics. And because the lifespan of a body worker can be, 3 or 4 years in some cases, if you don't take care of your body. There's a lot of stress that you can put on it. And so I'm a tall guy. I don't have great posture. My head tends to be forward. One of my brothers, my dad, is built that way. I tend to reach rather than kind of lean into. So I got a bit of a harassment from some of my instructors on the way I do things, and as a result, I'm very conscious about it in other areas too, like with the filmmaking. How am I standing, holding this camera versus, how I could be standing and supporting it better, But the body mechanics are a big part of the body work, or anything else that you're doing. You really have to think about what you're doing. If you're a chef and you're using a knife all the time, like you were talking about, shellfish or something like that, you really got to think about what you're doing. Get those breaks. Get your hands moved. Stretch them out. Strengthen them. Take care of your body.
Yeah, I'm going to reach back here and show you something. And if I showed you this in my room and I said this is part of my healing mechanism, do you have any ideas what this might be for healing?
Well, it looks like a curtain rod, but or a shower curtain rod, but I'm not sure how you're using it.
Okay, so back in the 80s, someone taught me shiatsu, acupressure, trigger point therapy, Bonnie Prudence, pain erasure, myotherapy. Those are all synonyms for that type of massage, which is a trigger point release. So what I have here is a curtain rod, and I tell people to get something a little bit stronger than this. Like a shovel handle is a really good length for me at my height, 6'2.5". A good length shovel handle, and it's very thick. It's almost an inch thick, a shovel handle, and it's heavy duty wood. And what I do is I put a towel over the end that's going to go into I start with my pocket line on my jeans typically. That's what Bonnie Pruden says to do. And then I take the other end, and if I'm in, almost never where I do this, because fortunately I lived in warm climates most of the last 3 decades. But if it was windy and rainy, I'd probably be in a covered area or inside, and I'd put a towel over the other end to protect the baseboard. And so what I do is I just go back into that area and wedge that in, and then go to the spot. So if I go to my upper back and wedge in, I have to lean in, and I have to angle, and I have to change this with the other hand. And because I have a towel on that, it gives me another point of pull, so I can give it resistance and pull and leverage on one way and then the other way, and I angle it. So I've been doing that outside since 1986, and I'm going to ask Steve Shepard, and I'm going to remind people of your website, modbodywork.com. Is that correct? Mod, M-O-D?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how many times since 1986, including being in San Francisco, where there are a lot of Asians who know about, how many times since 86 do you think I've ever seen someone else using a staff to do body work on themselves?
I don't know. There's several tools that you can use. There's a few hook things that you can get over your shoulder to dig into your rhomboids and your traps. I think that's a great method. You probably haven't seen too many people doing it though.
You are correct. The answer is 0. And the ironic part about this whole story is most people don't have a problem with the NSAIDs, and they don't have a problem with aspirin. They don't have a problem popping even an organic, healthful herb, turmeric. What's the other one that's famous for anti-inflammatory? It also comes in a, I'll come up with that in a second. But they don't have a problem with this, but actually doing something for themselves, to themselves, they're not doing it, but they do go in for deep tissue massage. They go in for physical therapy. They go in for chiropractic. So I'm flummoxed. I'm baffled by this thing is so effective for me, and it was taught to me by someone else who uses it. I'm baffled as to why people aren't doing this. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think part of it is education. They don't realize, part of what I do is trigger point therapy, and very often you can explain to a client, see what I'm doing here, you can do the same thing. You might have to use a tool to get there, and I think your example is great. Like you were saying, in the pocket of the jeans, those hip rotators, big problem for a lot of people. You get that trigger point pressure there, can be a lot of relief for a lot of different back problems. But I think a lot of people just don't know. They haven't been educated. I also do TMJ work with jaw problems. And one of the first things I do is say, see what I'm doing right now? You need to go home and you need to do the same thing. And here's how you can do it, since it's obviously going to be from a little different angle. All the way to, I do some internal work in the mouth. And a lot of times I'll say, get a pencil with a brand new eraser on it, cover it with something, and you can get to that spot that I'm getting to even better, and help trigger point those muscles that are creating problems for your jaw. So I think a lot of it's simply people don't know that. I didn't understand. I didn't know what trigger point was until I started taking bodywork courses.
What about your own going in for treatment with massage therapists or chiropractors? Had you heard of trigger point release, or had anyone taught you how to do anything to relieve even seasickness, going into the ulnar nerve and holding that? Had anybody shared any of those tidbits with you?
Before I went into body work, I'd only had a couple of massages. I hadn't gotten a lot of body work myself. A little bit with a chiropractor with some back and shoulder issues that I had. But yeah, nobody really talked about stuff that you could be doing to take care of some of these things. So like I said, a lot of it's just people don't know, and they need to be educated.
So what about a doctor when you had your first, or if you have a recollection of going to physicians, surgeons when you had some body issues from whether you're in high school injured or along the way? Do you remember anything they told you that was, their prescription for your healing?
I played volleyball when I was college age, and I sprained both my ankles a couple of times. And at that point, they were kind of changing the way they viewed that kind of injury. So one of the times I did it, the doctor was very specific about, you need to get and use that foot as early as possible to keep the mobility. If you just rest it and let it stiffen up, then you're going to have to work a long time to get that mobility back. So that particular doctor helped me understand that. I've probably had a couple of others, but generally it's sort of like, well, we'll take care of it, or this will take care of it. And, here's some antibiotics, or, get rest and drink lots of fluids, kind of thing.
Do you remember them giving you any heavy duty prescription type of NSAIDs? Tylenol type 2, those types of things?
Yeah, when I worked for UPS in my 20s, I also had braces, and I dropped the 50-pound package on my hand cart, and the hand cart hit me in the side of the head. And the braces just tore up my cheek. And the doctor did prescribe some, I think, Tylenol codeine kind of thing, because I was in a lot of pain. What I discovered with codeine is you still hurt, you just don't care.
Yeah,
that's what it is. Yeah. I don't particularly like Vicodin, things like that. They kind of deal with the pain, but I just kind of, it does something weird to me. And I whenever I've taken that kind of stuff, it's I don't even know how to describe it. Not buzzy, just a little agitated. Codeine would just put me to sleep, but Vicodin, I just get kind of agitated. So
I found the treatment that I was referring to before. It's called Traumeel. And if you go to Rational Wiki, which is very Western medicine based and perhaps science based, I'm not discounting that their science has led them in the direction of their finding, but they're calling it quackery, pseudoscience, homotoxicology. Actually, this site does not believe in homeopathic medicine, and I do believe in homeopathic medicine. Part of the reason it probably works on me is because I believe it. So everybody knows about the power of the mind and placebo, the placebo effect. Real science, I shouldn't say real science, but the Western world's version of science has tested placebo effect, and they've proven it almost as effective, if not equally as effective as many drugs and treatments over time. But Traumeel is something that I've taken, and I've gotten good success from it. It can be put on topically and taken internally. Read up on that. I'm telling you what works for me, viewing audience, and so you have to find out what you're comfortable with. And then there are all kinds of other herbs. So they mentioned turmeric, ginger, cinnamon. Those are 3 things that are in my tea. They also mentioned garlic, cayenne pepper, black pepper, clove. And clove also works to minimize intestinal gases, which is very helpful in the workplace or being the school bus driver. If you've got gas, having a little cup like even this size, a little small. I drink everything out of glass. And then putting some clove right in your filtered water, and then covering it, and you can sip that clove, and you can, when the cloves get decomposed a little bit over the day, you can just put them in there and chew on them. And actually, I had some gum, and I said, I wonder if this would work. So I had some of this herbal gum, and I just kind of played and got the clove inside of the gum, and then I got that clove taste for a good hour inside of that gum. And so that was a really nice experiment to come up with. So your thoughts on some of these natural remedies versus taking the codeine type things, and what would it take to spark people's interest in some of these natural ways? Would they have to believe them to be effective in order for them to be effective? That's a good place to start, probably.
Well, I think the reverse of the placebo effect also is true. If you really don't think it's going to work, your mind and body is not going to let it work. So if you're, the people that are maybe, behind this rational wiki or whatever, and I understand what they're doing. There's a lot of weirdness out there. I get that. And sometimes when you're looking at alternative methods for health and wellness and things like that, there are some stuff where I just go, okay, let's put on the brakes here and put on some critical thinking and see what's going on here. But if you're in that mindset where it's got to be proven by Western scientific methods, or it just isn't valid, then none of that stuff's going to work for you.
Yeah.
You're going to take you've got inflammation. You take turmeric, you're not going to see any change. So I think the reverse of the placebo effect also comes into play in those kinds of situations. But I think that these things legitimately do this stuff. I know I have really good success with turmeric when it comes to inflammation. Like I said, it's at least as good, if not better, for me than ibuprofen. And quite frankly, all things being even, I love ibuprofen. It works great for me as a painkiller, as an inflammation, reducer, things like that. I just know it's not healthy, and it's not something I want to be consuming on any kind of regular basis at all. So, I've seen some of this stuff work. I've seen some stuff that's kind of like, I don't know, that seems like a little, maybe a little out there, but so we got to use our critical mind, think things through, take a look at what the evidence is, but it's not always that strictly scientific Western sort of approach that is going to work. I mean, some of the traditional Chinese medicine has centuries they have been refining that stuff. And more and more research is also finding that, that it does work, because we can find a Western scientific explanation for why it's working. And we're finding that a lot more with various bodywork modalities, trigger point, cranial sacral stuff that people not too long ago might have said, oh, I don't know. There's research that says, this stuff works. Trigger point works. It's a great way to deal with pain, particularly chronic pain. And it's, I mean, if you could do that rather than take a handful of NSAIDs every day, or worse yet, opiates, then why not? It may take a little work on your part. You may need to get a tool or two. You may need to do some things in terms of exercises to help with that, to help go through it. And in some cases, literally, it can be one session with a good body worker, and all of a sudden, man, I haven't felt this great, and I don't know how long, and it's gone. And other times it takes a while to get to a really good place with the pain, and sometimes it takes maintenance to keep a healthy balance there. So.
Yeah, I'm with you. So I've been doing this since '86, as I mentioned, and the person who taught me was my girlfriend, and then her dad, who was a dentist up in Sacramento. He used it for himself, for his entire body, and his hands and his arms and his back. Think of that that very challenging position that a dentist is placed in for umpteen hours
Right.
per day, under duress oftentimes, because they have patients lined up. Those things that they're doing aren't always working. So there is a stressful ambiance in many the lives of dentists semi-permanently. It's not an easy way to make a living. And then and I have biomechanical issues based on my genetics, basically growing fast and having some things out of alignment. So this thing was my, and has been since '86, my great equalizer, and it allowed me to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu even with my hyper flexible aging body up until I was 50, with many times these young 20-year-olds that have much more athleticism and power than I do. But I think the reason I was able to do it and even win a few tournaments was I did the acupressure, I had more downtime, I had better diet, and I did my exercise program, which intuitively was a healing and a strengthening program. It wasn't just abusive, whereas many of these guys were doing heavy duty overload training, which would take them 4 or 5 days, if not longer. If their schedule was very challenging and they were high stress, it could take them longer to recover from. Whereas I was doing maintenance fitness, maintaining my body and not putting it into the state where it needed 5 to 6 days to recover. So I think those are some of the ways that I was able to flourish through the aging process. And now I'm 54, and I feel like in my age group, I would be in the top 1% of Westerners. I'm not saying athletic ability, because there are people who can ride, the Tour de France in their 50s. I couldn't do that. But in terms of everything working and not being in an inflamed state and going to sleep like with no problem, waking up and not needing coffee, not eating food because I'm fat adapted, having that whole connection with the mind, body, and spirit, I would say I'm doing very well. And it's because I embraced it. I didn't make it this very hard thing. I said, oh, that works. All those things, these lovely people like this dentist and my girlfriend, and today some of the lessons I'm getting from Steve, I factor that in as gifts from these people and from God and the universe. And I say, that's wisdom, and that's things that I need. Those are things that I need to put into my program and make my program stronger, not in some egotistical way, but in this relief and this wellness and natural way. So maybe you could chime in, Steve, and see what you think on that.
Well, when we made our changes to our diet, and when I say diet, I wish there was a better word, because it really has to bleed over into the rest of your life. It's really more of a lifestyle change. And we've had a little bit of ups and downs. The holidays can be difficult, things like that. But for the most part, it wasn't really that difficult to make the change. And part of the reason was a lot of people take this all or nothing approach. If I'm going paleo and getting rid of grains, I could never have any grain at all. Well, we were pretty much 100% grain free, but it's Thanksgiving dinner and somebody made peach cobbler, and I'm not going to be that guy, and that's one of the things my wife and I said. When we go over to somebody's house, if we go to a party, something like that, we're not going to be those people, because I know some people aren't going to like what I'm about to say, but some people are vegetarians or vegans or whatever category you want to put themselves in, just to be the center of attention. Mm-hmm. I know people like that, and I didn't want to be, so Thanksgiving, there's peach cobbler there. I might have a little bit. We might make something and bring ourselves so that we don't have to. But I think by living with sort of an 80-20 rule or even a 90-10 rule, it made it much easier to adapt. And we really did not have a lot. The biggest problem was finding good food sources. Particularly, we have 3 dogs. We travel with them. They're performance dogs. We're involved in different dog events. When we're traveling like that, it's really hard to find clean food when you kind of need it on the run. So that was more of an issue than just the day-to-day maintenance of what we felt like we needed to put in our bodies. That wasn't that difficult. It was more like, okay, we're out at a restaurant, we're on the road, we've got to find someplace to eat. What do we do? But I wanted to touch on what you said about recovery and rest and things like that. One of the things that I think is a real benefit of bodywork is the fact that the relaxation part of it. Now, when you start doing neuromuscular therapy and some of this other stuff, sometimes the therapists start getting a little like, oh, the Swedish and the oiled massage stuff, foo-foo, that's just, that's fun, silly stuff. I don't take that view. The body recovers when it's at rest. You don't get stronger during exercise, you get stronger during recovery, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's when all this stuff takes place. Same thing's true when your body needs to heal. It heals when it's rested, not when it's in a stress situation. So we have the sympathetic response, we have the parasympathetic response. The sympathetic response is that fight and flight thing, the adrenaline, the cortisol, all that stuff rushing through our bodies. It's great when you're in a tough situation and you got to get out of it. But too many of us live right on the edge of that with the stress of work and this and family. And, we've got the kids, got to take the kids to soccer practice and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And we live there. Body work, particularly more of the massage side of things, that can take us into that parasympathetic state where the rest and digest and relax. And that's where the body can heal. And that's an important part of any kind of healthy regimen. If you're on the go, exercising all the time, this and that, but like you said, if you don't get that downtime, sleep's part of that, but it's not just sleep. It's just, and staring at the television or your smartphone doesn't count. That's not always that restful, especially sometimes watching the news these days. So
it's not historically natural. If you go back before television, there were other ways to do it, and they worked just fine, and they allowed for human interaction, which I think is what we're mainly lacking in the modern era, downtime with human interaction.
Yeah, I mean, meals used to be about that interaction, not just consuming ballast. And I think that's very typical of the standard American diet, the SAD diet, is that it's just about filling the belly, energy to get through the day. Where in a lot of cultures, even still in Europe and other places, that shared meal is very much a social interaction, as much as a nourishing interaction, and it does nourish us in other ways, just besides just food.
Yeah, I'm with you on all of that. So you mentioned making change and going paleo, and I've done some dietary changes in the past year that were significant. I learned more about food combining, and that's a whole different program. We could talk an hour on that, and believe me, it really works. And I've considered a very healthful diet in gaining in ability on choosing the right things, not always having good access to the right things. I think having access to healthful food was a lot easier in my first 20 years of life than it is today. I grew up on a farm. We had a garden. I hunted pheasant and deer. We had lots of black Angus on the farms in New Jersey that were nearby, and so we had lots of local meat and game meat right there. We have the vegetables right in the garden, and we had apples, in the fall we had 20 different varieties of apples in just the two farmers that were within 5 miles from us, 20 with no pesticides. I mean, that was a phenomenal thing in the 1970s, and we could go and try them. And the farmer had this cool house, this like and we go in there and he says, go out and choose whatever you like, and then we'll piece that together in a bushel, and it'll be this giant bushel. Back in like 74 was like $15 for this gigantic thing. I mean, that took care of my family, which was 5 people, for a month. $15 on one of our main pieces of fruit. So I made those dietary changes, the food combining, eliminating sugar, which was sad because I do believe in dessert and the thrill of the end of the meal and dessert. But I said, okay, I need more health. I need better digestion. And I've been counseled by someone who knows diet better than I do to eliminate the sugars. And so I did that. I had already eliminated most of the rice, and I still eat potatoes, especially sweet potatoes and yams.
Right.
But I eliminated, years ago, I eliminated pasta, but recently I eliminated rice. And it's, believe me, for my makeup, and I'm not telling everyone they need to eliminate rice, but if you're overweight, I would start with that, see what happens. But I did eliminate a lot of these things, learned about food combining, learned about different drinks and the pH balance of my system and my blood, and all of those things have helped. So I don't know if you can see my complexion. I feel looks pretty good for 54. I'm thriving. I have energy. I feel like I could go 3 rounds of boxing with someone my size and fitness level, but I don't have a good nose for going for 3 or 4 rounds of boxing. So maybe you could chime in on food choices and the decades of your life and how it's changed, and where do you go now in 2017 and beyond to find good food that's affordable, because a good apple right now could cost 80 cents.
Well, one of the arguments about grass-fed beef and organic food and this and that is the expense. But the problem is, if you factor in what we're spending on medical care for food-related disease, it's a bargain. I'm sorry, it's a bargain. The other thing is, if you're on a good diet, you've got healthy fats, you're somewhat low on the carbs, getting rid of the really carb-heavy stuff, getting rid of sugar, which is horribly inflammatory, you won't eat as much. You don't eat as much. When we first made this switch, I remember one evening, I made a little piece of grass-fed beef and a little plate of vegetables, and I went to serve it to me and my wife, and I thought, oh, this just doesn't look like enough. And we were just sitting there completely satisfied, because the carb-heavy thing is just this revolving door of hunger. It spikes your insulin. Now you're hungry again. You see the kinds of portions in American restaurants. I remember reading Anthony Bourdain's book, Kitchen Confidential. He went over to Japan to open the restaurant that he was working at in New York and in Japan. And the thing that he had to work the most at was reducing the portion size of what they served and recalculating all the recipes and stuff, because the rest of the world doesn't serve restaurant food like that. So, but if you cut down on the carbs, cut down on that stuff, rice is a good one. I still eat potatoes to some degree. One of the things you can do with potatoes is you cook them and cool them. A fair amount of the carb content in it becomes soluble fiber, and it drops on the glycemic scale. So very often I will cut up stuff for hash browns, parboil it, put it in the fridge, and in the morning I cook it with breakfast. And and sweet potatoes is another thing, because it's much lower on the glycemic scale. But I think one of the big things too is healthy fat, and we have been bold-faced lied to about fat for 40 years, 50 years.
Yeah.
I cook with lard. I cook with tallow. About the only vegetable oils I use are coconut oil and avocado oil. Canola oil is horrible stuff. It's just this side of an industrial lubricant. Any corn oil, anything labeled vegetable oil is soybean oil, all that stuff. It's terrible. But they said, oh, fat. That's the problem. That's the problem. Well, they replaced it with carb. And for the last 50 years, we've seen heart disease go up. We've seen
asthma
go
diabetes.
Type 2 diabetes, skin disease. When I changed my diet, I didn't burn as easy. Seriously. because we were out in the sun a lot with our dog sports, and once we got in solidly in this lifestyle change, we didn't burn as easy. I think a lot of this stuff, it's inflammatory stuff that we've been told to put in our bodies for the last 40, 50 years. And we're reaping the benefits of it now. And if it were to continue, a third of the adult population is going to be diabetic by 2050. So, yeah, I'm off my soapbox.
Yeah, very, very nice. So I'm going to remind people again, Steve Shepard, SHEPARD, bodywork.com, MOD, bodywork.com. And I am, and you're available in Santa Barbara currently for body treatments and for videography and film work as well. Is that the case?
Yeah, as I move more into body work, I'm hoping to transition into a thing where I'll do body work and supplement it with film work. It's kind of hard for body workers to you don't do 8 massages a day. You just can't. You
have to have supplemental source of income.
Most people are doing a little bit of something else to help with it, because it's very physical.
Yeah. And then and I'm Sifu Slim, SIFU Slim at sifuslim.com, and I'm going to bring up a quick story here. This is book 2 called The Aging Athlete, and the most difficult part for high school, college, pro athletes who've been training 3 to 5 hours per day, or a general contractor who's doing 8 to 10 hours of heavy duty, landscaper, Broadway dancers, any high performance physical people, is the transition from high performance to regular human who's a former athlete who now wants to move in, I think should say, I want to move into recreation, joyful movement, maybe some light competition, wellness and maintenance. Those things are completely different than being a performance athlete. Now you have performance athlete and your goal is to get better times, to win events, to win competitions. I agree. That's your goal in those circumstances. But now you have a life. And so let's say you leave being an Olympic athlete, you're 28. What do you do now from age 28 to 98? That's 70 years that you've got to live. Well, you can't just think that, hey, I'm a former performance athlete who now is a has-been, because that's a problem. You have to switch gears and say, now I'm going to learn the joy of movement without needing all of the coaching. Maybe I'll play some team sports still and be around other people, and I'll get some body work done. I'll do some acupressure. I'll have a good diet, and I'm not going to have to fly around the country like an NBA player has to fly. They play 88 games a year, and they're on the road so many days a year. It's ridiculous. But so this transition. So how do you feel that a transition can be made? Because this is such a huge ego thing when you come from performance and winning, or attempting to win. Now you're going back into regular society, and you may have to have a job or an activity that is rather sedentary. How do you maintain your physicality, your wellness? Because you may have like a knee issue, a back issue, a neck issue, or all 3 or more. And now you have to move back into society. Do you have any suggestions for these people making the transition into regular society?
That's a good question. Not having been that type of athlete or anything like that. Although I think we all come to that place where I can't do what I used to do. Could beat my son at basketball. I couldn't even keep up with him now. That kind of stuff. So we've all got to learn to kind of make those changes. But at the same time, I think it's a difficult balance, because you don't want to give up. I've seen people just kind of like, I don't do anything anymore because it's a little harder, and physically, or
a lot harder.
Yeah, but physically they really start sliding. And as I've gotten into body work, there's been a couple of periods of time during this my learning phase and starting a practice where I felt my body start to betray me a little bit. It's like, wow, man, I just, my hip rotators are really, now I've got this sciatic thing going on, and how am I going to do something so physical if I'm having these problems? And that gets back to, well, if I'm doing this for somebody else, I need somebody to do it for me as well, I had some sciatic pain in my left side. And one of my instructors did a little work on me, discovered that it was the QL on the other side that was really the problem, worked on that. 2 days later, I haven't had any pain since. So, but I think we've got to find that balance of, I got to find stuff that I enjoy and I like doing and can continue to do, but not give into the notion where I'm just getting older and I just can't do as much anymore. My grandfather on my mom's side was an avid hunter, field judge for dog trials. He was as he aged, he was still very active, and you saw it in his health, his vitality, his personality, and and finally his body just gave up, and end of life came. Where I've seen on my other side, bad choices, health, stuff like that, and you see somebody's body break down and degrade way before its time. So I think one of the main things is you got to stay active somehow. You got to get off that couch. And I think it all starts with finding something that you enjoy doing. Like I said, I hate running. I am not going to run. So that's not going to happen. But I can get on my bike. I don't mind a little lifting. I don't mind some other stuff. I think that's a big key. It's you want to stay active. You want to stay healthy. You just got to find what works for you. This is the problem I have when somebody says, like, okay, this particular diet, paleo, because when you start talking about paleo, you get some hardcore people that are just like, this is the way it is, and that's the way that you can't have dairy, you can't have this, you can't have that. And I'm more of the point of what is working for me. And if it's working for me over the long term, then I can adapt those things, because everybody's different. Everybody has different tolerances, things like that. So stay active, find lifestyle choices that work for you, adapt them for your circumstances, for your body, for your mentality, and get some body work.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in body work. And, Joe Montana, Hall of Famer, 49ers quarterback, really interesting guy, graduated from Notre Dame, and he's a winner. He wins games, and that's one of his things. He's competitive, but he's not just competitive. He actually has an extra skill, like Jimmy Connors and many athletes do, which is the ability to win. And it's not, in his case, just by abusing people. He just has an extra level he can go to win. And so as he was doing his professional football, he wasn't big like some of these people, Roethlisberger, and who's the quarterback who just won, Brady. These are 6'4" big people, right? And Joe Montana is probably 188, 190, something like that, which isn't a small quarterback for the 1980s, but he's not a big galoot. And those linemen at 260, 280 are creaming him all the time. So he had to go in and get chiropractics, from what I read, before the game and after the game. And I shouldn't say he had to go get it. Allowed him to thrive. Getting chiropractics was a lovely gift. And some of these professional teams have switched gears since the old days of medicine and corticosteroid type injections and pills to getting treatments from physical therapists, fascia stretch people, physical therapists, your background people, etc. And they're getting less injuries. They're having longer careers. Not that I'm saying you should get your head banged around for any more years than your career already is, but those things translate to living a well life. If you want to perform well in the football game, you do body therapy. And if you want to perform well in life, you do body therapy, just in order to maintain this human kinetic chain that has lots of issues just from the aging process and from living. Your thoughts on that, and then we'll wind down.
Well, our bodies are really sort of amazing. The abuse that they take over a lifetime is amazing. So one of the things when I'm working with somebody is history. What has your body been through? And not just the body, the mind too, because what's going on in our psyche takes hold in different places of our body as well. But somebody comes in and says, my neck has been killing me for 2 years. Well, what happened 2 years ago? And I start digging a little more. Well, I broke my ankle about a little more than 2 years ago. Well, your body's compensated for that broken ankle, and now it's gone all the way up and it's created problems for your neck. And for athletes, this is a big issue, because a performance athlete, they deal with injury all the time, and their bodies are masters at compensating. But when we compensate, we're throwing the body off kilter, at least for a period of time, and very often the body gets stuck there. And body work and things like that can readjust, get things firing again, getting I was working with somebody not long ago, TMJ issues. She had abdominal surgery during the summer. She's breathing with her chest. Her neck muscles are pulling her chest up to breathe because she's not using her abdomen. It's causing all kinds of pressure on her neck and her jaw and things like that. So the compensation can manifest itself all over the place. So that's I think a really big issue for athletes or anybody is trauma, injury, broken bones, that kind of stuff. It very often, because of the compensation, throws the alignment and things off the body. And so history and what a person's been through is huge when I do an intake, particularly if I'm dealing with issues of pain, postural issues, stiffness, alignment, stuff like that.
Wonderful. So Steve Shepard, it's been wonderful hanging out with you on Google Hangouts on Air. And when I'm in Santa Barbara this June, maybe we can get together and do a little round of putting up at the Muni Golf Course and have breakfast up there. I'm going to have some bacon. So I'll join you on a paleo breakfast up at the Muni Golf Course, which if you don't know, it's a very good breakfast. It's old school restaurant food, and they give you these Mexican blankets to put over your legs in the cool mornings, which is really a sweet thing that they do. So you're available at modbodywork.com, and I'm reaching out to you and your viewers. Maybe you could stick a couple of these in your waiting room at your bodywork location, but Sedentary Nation and the Aging Athlete. And I'm hoping these help people with their wellness, with their physicality, with their mindset for self-mastery. And that's what I believe in pursuing. We do well at our work. We do well with our family. We do well with our mind, body, and spirit. Those are all engaging our ethic of mastering self, which means doing things well and learning from other people, factoring that in, learning from intuition, learning from meditation, and using those lessons effectively throughout our life to be good citizens, to be good stewards of the land, and to pass on those gifts to other people. And so that's the intention side, and maybe we'll chime in on another interview with Steve on intention. So any last words before we go, Steve?
Find what works for you. Get off the couch, whether it's diet, exercise, whatever. Find something you enjoy doing, and you'll be much more likely to follow through on it.
Wonderful. So how about we end our standing session today instead of 3? You mind doing 10 jumping jacks with me, and then I'll stop the broadcast.
Sure.
And by the way, I could do interviews from now until I'm 95, and I don't think I'm going to find someone who's matched a cool shirt with a cool headset, matched the colors so appropriately.
You got to stay on brand, man. Modern bodywork blue.
Modern bodywork blue. So here we go. 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. A little martial arts to end it. Have a great day, Steve. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon. Aloha.
Okay. Aloha. Thanks.